Christmas Eve 2002. In Modesto, the air was cold but calm. Neighborhoods were quiet. Wrapping paper was being folded. Ovens were warming. By the end of the day, a pregnant woman vanished. No signs of forced entry. No struggle. No witnesses. Her name was Laci Peterson. Laci was 8 months pregnant. She had already picked out a name. Connor. The nursery was nearly finished. At first, it looked like a tragic missing persons case in Modesto. A husband worried. Community searching. Candlelight vigils. National sympathy. But behind the cameras, behind the tears, there was one mistake. One detail that unraveled everything. And that mistake would bring down her husband, Scott Peterson. Tonight, we're not just telling the story. We're breaking down the psychological fracture, the timeline collapse, and the critical error that transforms suspicion into conviction in one of America's most infamous murder cases. Stay with me, because what brought him down wasn't what most people think. Christmas Eve morning. Scott says he left home around 9:30 a.m. He planned to go fishing alone at the Berkeley Marina, about 90 miles away near the San Francisco Bay. Laci was home watching cooking shows, planning to mop the floors, walk the dog. By 5:15 p.m., he says he returned. The house was quiet. Laci wasn't there. The dog was found wandering with its leash still on. Her car sat in the driveway. Her purse inside the house. Her phone unused. From the very beginning, investigators noticed something subtle. Scott's emotional presentation didn't match the urgency. He was calm, controlled, measured, not hysterical, not frantic. He did interviews. He attended searches. He stood beside Laci's family, and America believed him. Now, calm doesn't mean guilty, but in missing spouse cases, investigators immediately begin assessing baseline behavior. Within days, the case exploded nationally. Cable news vans parked on the street. Search teams combed parks and orchards. Volunteers passed out flyers. Pregnant women gone missing trigger something primal in the American psyche. Hope dominated the early days. Maybe she went for a walk. Maybe she was abducted. Maybe she would come home. Scott appeared publicly. He stood beside Laci's mother. He thanked volunteers. He spoke softly into microphones. But investigators were quietly building a timeline. And timelines don't care about emotions. They care about precision. Phone records, receipts, witness sightings. Scott said he went fishing at the Berkeley Marina near the San Francisco Bay. Investigators asked, why that far? Why Christmas Eve? Why alone? He said he just needed time. He bought the boat weeks earlier. Few people knew about it. The first major fracture didn't come from forensic evidence. It came from a phone call. Weeks before Laci disappeared, Scott had started seeing another woman, Amber Fry, a massage therapist, single mother, living in Fresno. Scott met her in November 2002, just weeks before Laci vanished. He told her he was single. He told her he had never been married. And in mid-December, days before Laci vanished, he told Amber something chilling, that this would be his first Christmas without his wife. Except, his wife wasn't dead yet. When Amber saw news coverage of Laci's disappearance, she contacted police. And what she did next would become one of the most pivotal moments in the case. And investigators began recording their calls. Scott didn't know he was being recorded. And that was mistake number one. While Laci was missing, Scott continued talking to Amber. He told her he was in Paris. In reality, he was attending a candlelight vigil for Laci. He whispered romantic lies while cameras filmed him grieving. The public saw two different versions of the same man. And once the recordings were released, public opinion shifted dramatically. But public opinion doesn't convict. Evidence does. And this case would hinge on one key location. And the more he spoke, the more investigators compared his words to hard data. Cell towers, travel times, geography. Scott claimed he went fishing at the Berkeley Marina on Christmas Eve. Investigators verified he launched his small aluminum boat there. But months later, April 2003, something happened. The bodies of Laci and her unborn son were discovered along the shoreline of the San Francisco Bay, near where Scott said he had been fishing. The location was devastating. Not proof on its own, but proximity matters. The prosecution argued this wasn't coincidence. They presented evidence that Scott had researched tidal patterns, that he purchased a boat shortly before the disappearance, that he made homemade anchors. Only one anchor was ever found. Prosecutors suggested multiple anchors were created, possibly to weigh down a body. The defense pushed back hard. No forensic evidence inside the boat. No DNA tying the boat to a homicide. No eyewitnesses placing Laci there. But jurors were watching something else. The pattern. Pattern is powerful in court. When investigators evaluate suspects, they assess post-crime behavior. Scott continued speaking with Amber for weeks after Laci disappeared. He never admitted he was married, even as her face dominated national headlines. He sold Laci's vehicle. He explored selling the house. To some, this looked like moving on too quickly. To others, it was practical coping. Interpretation became everything. Then came April 18, 2003. Scott was arrested in La Jolla, near a golf course. He had dyed his hair, grown facial hair, carried thousands of dollars in cash, multiple phones, camping equipment. The prosecution suggested flight. The defense argued coincidence. But visuals matter in courtrooms, and the image of a husband altering his appearance while his pregnant wife was missing left a mark. The trial began in 2004 in Redwood City. What made this case unusual was what it lacked. No murder weapon. No crime scene. No confession. Entirely circumstantial. But circumstantial cases can be powerful when each piece aligns. The prosecution built 5 pillars. 1. The affair and pre-Christmas statement. 2. The Marina trip. 3. Body recovery location. 4. The boat and anchor evidence. 5. Post-disappearance behavior. The defense presented alternative theories, including a burglary across the street and possible abduction. They argued media bias had poisoned perception. They emphasized reasonable doubt. The jury deliberated for days, and ultimately returned guilty verdicts. First-degree murder for Laci. Second-degree murder for Connor. Scott Peterson was sentenced to death. Years later, his death sentence was overturned due to jury selection errors, but the conviction stood. He was resentenced to life without parole. So what truly brought him down? Not one piece of evidence. Not one dramatic reveal. It was accumulation. But above all, it was that December 9th statement to Amber. "This will be my first Christmas without my wife." That sentence reshaped everything. Because once Laci disappeared, investigators didn't ask, "Did something happen?" They asked, "What did he already know? Why do some criminals unravel themselves?" In many high-profile U.S. cases, like Chris Watts, the pattern is similar. Double lives, image management, underestimating digital trails, overconfidence. The modern era exposes deception faster. Cell phone pings, credit card receipts, recorded calls. Scott Peterson lived in the early 2000s before social media exploded, but technology still caught up with him. To this day, some debate the fairness of the trial. Supporters argue circumstantial evidence leaves room for doubt. Others argue the totality leaves no reasonable alternative. And here's the haunting truth. If Scott Peterson had never told Amber Fry that this would be his first Christmas without his wife, would the investigation have unfolded the same way? Would the timeline have been scrutinized differently? Would the Marina have meant anything? But one truth remains. The mistake wasn't a fingerprint. It wasn't blood. It wasn't a weapon. It was arrogance. The belief that narratives can be managed indefinitely. That words leave no trace. That timelines won't be compared. In the end, it wasn't just evidence that convicted Scott Peterson. It was inconsistency. And in criminal investigations, inconsistency is often the loudest confession.